You Hand Over the Keys with host Anne-Marie Hayes. This is episode 2, Choosing the Right Driving School with Christine Raby. Today we're going to be talking about teaching your teens, your young people how to drive. And we'll start with the how to choose a good driving school. And I can tell you from experience, they're not all the same. Then we'll talk about tips for the do-it-yourselfer if for whatever reason you've chosen to teach your young person to drive by yourself. Then we'll give you some tips about that. And even if you do send them to a really good driving school, which of course I totally endorse, then you'll be coaching them. So we'll give you some tips for that. And then the last part here is things you can do now, even if they don't have a G1 yet, things that you can do now and things that you must do afterwards, after they have their full G. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And as I've mentioned before, I am a certified driving instructor in Ontario. I'm certified for classroom and for in-car. And I've been doing this for 12 years, working with young people around driving issues. I have a year of experience behind the wheel because I felt it was really important to understand how we're teaching young people to drive. And for a year, I was with the Canadian Tire Driving Academy, and I was the lead instructor there. But I have a person with me today who knows more than I will ever know about how to teach a young person to drive. She's been in this industry of actually teaching young people to drive for 34 years. She has 9 locations of her driving school. She's Christine Raby. Hi, Christine. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm very honored, I have to say. This is a wonderful platform for everybody to kind of get educated and learn some new things. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, you and I are on the same page as far as teaching young people to drive safely, as opposed to teaching them how to pass the test. And that's something that's happening in our industry, and it's very dangerous. There are instructors that just teach young people how to pass the test. And of course, that's incredibly dangerous, but that's really what young people want. All they want is that license. I know you've seen the young people who come in and sit in the classroom on Saturday morning, and it's like, oh, I wish I could be anywhere else until you get started. Because I know that you are a very motivating, energetic instructor.
Oh, and one of the things I love to do the most is because yes, there are some of them that don't want to be there, and in all fairness, there are some that definitely want to be there. But one of my favorite things to do is at the very beginning of the program is say, how many of you guys already know how to drive? And it's amazing. Half of the class will lift up their hand, and I say, yeah. And I say, you know what? My ultimate goal in the next 4 days or the next 25 hours is really to blow your mind because I really want to show you, how much there is to know out there. And that's just scratching the surface, right? So that's how we start our program. I want to blow your mind. That's my goal.
And it's true because I got into this because of my own daughter, but there are so many things that people believe we know, but so much we don't know. Even if you've been driving for 25, 30 years, there are so many things you don't know, partly because things change, but partly because you may not have learned the best techniques to begin with, or some of them may have lapsed a bit over the course of years.
Right, we tend to get stuck in these ruts, and even us as instructors, we it's good for us to do upgrading classes because we do get complacent very easily to and we feel a sense of security because we have so many hours under our belts, and that's why it's good to have this refresher all the time. So you know what I always say, one price and the whole family gets to learn because you watch the teens that when they after they take the program, they're going to be teaching mom and dad a few things. So that's
You're
good.
absolutely right. But I think that's true. And they're really proud when they learn something that their parents, that their families don't know, and they can go back and share that. So I totally agree with you. Um, I know that a lot of people look at the MTO website and it says approved schools, and then sometimes there are a few that have lost their license or are disgraced for some reason. And so parents look at that, and I did at one time, and I think, okay, so a course includes 20 hours in a classroom. They all must have that. And 10 hours behind the wheel. They all must have that. And 10 hours of something else, which you and I both know is some kind of homework. And so that's it. And so if they all have that, why would I pay $1,000 for a course when I can get one for $299? And what's your response to that?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the differences are unlimited, really, when you think about it. You really want to kind of consider what does each individual school have to offer, as far as the quality and the commitment to the students and the commitment to the community. I mean, sometimes schools can definitely offer the in-class portion. Not everything is created equal. I mean, the the little boxes that you have to check off from the MTO are the same, but there's more than one way to make a chocolate chip cookie too, right? And then you have the premium chocolate chip cookie and you have the bottom basement chocolate chip cookie. They're both cookies, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's really important what goes into it.
Absolutely. And some of that is technical, how you appeal. Some courses are far more interactive. And I've also heard like horror stories about somebody will go in and put on a video, not even a driving video, while they take a customer out or, a student out in the car during this classroom. They're just putting in time. And good schools really concentrate on you at 20 hours. I mean, it sounds like so much. There's a lot to pack into 20 hours.
I can tell you when I first started in this business, we were offering 24 hours or 25 hours. I don't even remember the number because I superseded that number. And our program because my program was 28 hours in length of one-on-one in-person classes. So it's kind of morphed and it's changed, for some for the good. I mean, the MTO put in requirements for us to make it a little bit more interactive and so on. So that kind of took some of our time away from that direct instruction. But I really believe it was for the good, and being able to get the students more involved because our students are changing. We don't have the same type of attention span that we had 20 years ago, or this, so our classroom has to change and our delivery has to change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, here we're living in the time of COVID. Everything is constantly evolving and changing. So that is very true. And driving habits. And in fact, as I'm sure I've mentioned before, there are more road crashes and more excessive speed charges and more stunt driving charges now than there have ever been. So, this is a really good time to make sure that new drivers get the foundation they need. And one of the things that you've said in the past that I love is that driver education is an investment. I know parents, I mean, when my daughter was young, she went to soccer. She took piano lessons. I mean, all the things you invest money in. And then when it comes to driver education, people are thinking, oh, I can go cheap. They're all the same. And that's just not true.
No. Sorry, going back to what I said before, is it's one price and the whole family gets to learn. So it's something that I believe in with my whole heart, and that's why I really invest a lot of time in my program, and develop program development and making sure that we keep everything fresh and so on, because it needs to be engaging for everybody and all age groups and all skill levels. We can always use that reminder, as to the basics, go back to basics, and I think it's really important that we engage the public across the board, not just new drivers.
Oh, absolutely. One of the other ways that I looked at that after we talked last time was, what's your deductible? If your deductible is $500 and driver education can help you avoid one crash, I mean, that's $500 that you've saved. And so put that toward a good driver education course. But don't stop there. I mean, you really quality costs. When you think of all the elements that go into driver education, aside even from having, bricks and mortar, it's the cost of fuel, the cost of the instructor's time, the cost of the instructor to come to your house. Um, e- all of those things. It is an expensive proposition, and but it can make the world of difference to a new driver. So we invest because nobody ever expects it's going to happen to someone in their family. But
Exactly.
there are more crashes than ever, and they're happening to somebody's family, right? So protect yourself. It's a form of insurance, if you will. Another thing that we talked about, and there are a lot of unscrupulous people offering driver education. And I say unscrupulous because they try to, first of all, they teach to the test. And if they're teaching to the test just to help a young person pass, I mean, you and I have talked about that. The test is only maximum 20 minutes. Now they're shortening it. So, how easily can you teach someone to pass 20 minutes of driving? The mechanics of driving the car are relatively simple. Anybody can master that. That's not driving. And in Ontario, especially, I mean, we have, first of all, we drive at way higher speeds, and a lot of traffic. And there, that comes with all kinds of, where you're looking, all kinds of things. And we'll get on to more tips and stuff after. But one of the things that we talked about are the bottom feeders, the guys who are out there looking for a quick buck and teaching young people just to pass the test. And what um, ways would you say, help families avoid the bottom feeders?
Well, I don't want to say it's mostly on price, but that's your biggest indicator is somebody who is kind of advertising on Kijiji or any one of these little, Craigslist, any one of these sites where it's like the lowest price kind of gets it. There's no oversight for these people. I mean, they have nobody to answer to other than themselves. So that becomes a problem in the sense that who do you complain to? I mean, how do you even guarantee that these people have the right insurance for one? That's just the very first tip of the iceberg. Let alone, as you said, it's they're really focused on teaching to test. Whereas, a reputable school will try to understand or get the students to understand the psychological stuff that goes behind the rules and regulations. Why do we have these rules, and why did they decide to form it this way, and what was its purpose, and so on. Um, as well as kind of like giving them the most experiences as you can. What makes a great driver at the end of the day is experience and exposure. You're going to hear me say that over and over and over again, and there's no shortcuts to that. So what we do in our area is, we're gonna do a little bit of driving here in your neighborhood because obviously that's a good place to start. But once we've mastered some skills, let's get out of here. We have two beautiful highways to explore. We have the 406, we have the QEW, we have many, many neighboring cities that we can go into that have very unique geographical areas that I'm going to stretch their brain. I want them to figure it out. After all, I've taught them the basics. Now, because remember, they're not only going to just drive in Ontario for the rest of their life, they're going to be going on vacation. They're going to be in England. They're going to be in Hawaii. They're going to be, in Saskatchewan. I don't know. But we need to give them the skills to be able to figure out different traffic patterns and what it all means and how to put it all together.
In Ontario, if a new driver has a G1, they must drive with a co-driver. That co-driver cannot take them on a 400 series highway or named highways like the DVP or the Gardner or any of those without a driving instructor. So if they are not a certified driving instructor, they must wait until the student has um, a G2. And then when that student gets the G2, they can load up their car and head out on the 401. The 401 is officially the busiest highway in North America, with up to 16 lanes of traffic that you have to maneuver through. There's merging, there's getting off at your exit, there's watching the signage. And so we'll talk at the end of this podcast how you can help your teens with that once they have a G2. But you cannot do it if you are the co-driver at the G1 level. Only, and that's another reason to sign your teens up for professional instruction, because it's a different style of driving. It's high speed driving, which makes it more dangerous in many ways. And there's no way around that for parents.
Well, well, you mentioned all the things that are key to highway driving, but one thing we forgot was all the aggressive driving. The drivers, sorry, the aggressive driving that's happening around us, and so that defensive driving, those strategies on space and all that type of thing has to go into it. And I'm not so sure that as much as parents are great drivers, are parents great communicators as to what they need to look for and why you're looking for it? What do you do when you see it? And how do you best protect yourself? All that type of thing. So, I think, parents to be able to start as a basic, to be able to kind of pave the way on the basics of driving. I really think that to seek out professional help for the more advanced things is, again, like you said, an investment into their future, into the whole family, because again, they'll share what they're learning, and it's a good reminder for all of us.
Well, not only are some drivers very aggressive, but they're watching the car right ahead of them. And that's not where your eyes should be. And that's one of the things that a driving instructor will help with. It's where should you be looking? And that's really key to driving. So that you have notice when traffic is stopping, and you have notice of a car that could pull out in front of you before you actually get to the car. Oh, another thing that I wanted to mention was that I saw recently on Facebook Marketplace people advertising, driving instructors advertising. And I'll tell you, I made this mistake with duct cleaners. And I saw the ad and thought, oh, these are reputable people in my neighborhood, because otherwise they would not be allowed on this private community forum. And that's just not true. These jerks came out. They didn't clean the ducts. I paid them and then realized that they'd actually caused some problems for our furnace and because they took things apart. I mean, it was a much longer story. But I assumed because they were on a private community board that they were okay. And that was a big mistake. And so just a tip there is, don't trust driving instructors who are putting their information on a private board like that too, because it looks like they're trustworthy and they
But
aren't.
the issue is that there's no oversight. There's nobody above them. So if you're not happy, or if they did cause some issues, or you had a concern, or you had there's not no one to ask. There's no one to be accountable. And so for that reason, I always say, what, parents, you have done an amazing job protecting your kids up until now, right? I mean, we baby proofed, we did this, we did stranger danger, everything that we've done up until now. And yet when it comes to driving instruction, sometimes we're a little lax in that, in the sense that, like you said, we're looking at the bottom line a little bit and saying, where can I cut corners? And this is really not a corner that you want to cut, in my opinion.
Then we want to talk a little bit about things driving instructors. It a dri- Working with a driving instructor is a fairly kind of intimate relationship. You're two people alone in the front seat of a vehicle, so there are things that driving instructors should never do. And we talked a little bit about this before. One is they shouldn't be using their cell phone while the student is driving. The instructor is the second set of eyes on the road. They're supposed to be coaching, they're supposed to be watching, they shouldn't be on a cell phone. And because as much as cell phones are distracting for the driver, they're also distracting for the co-driver. So that comes back to parents. If you are the one who is co-driving with your student, you shouldn't be on your cell phone. Turn it off while you're in the vehicle. They will drive the way you do as soon as you're out of the car, but with a whole lot less experience.
Exactly. That's such a good point. We should highlight that in big bold letters. Is you need to start now. I mean, again, we all kind of pick up bad habits, but now when they're 14, 15, 16, they're paying even more attention than they did when they were little. So let's highlight that in big bold letters. So if you're just kind of taking a glance at your phone when you're driving down the road, guess what? They're going to do the exact same thing. If you're rolling stop signs, yeah.
Oh, rolling stop signs is another whole thing, but, glancing at their cell phone, I mean, and it's very likely they'll be doing that because, first of all, they already know they're way better on their cell phones than you are, and I've had students say, "You know, well, for you, that's true, but I don't even have to look." Well, you can't read it without looking at it. I mean, they are looking, whether they think they're not, and that's their eyes off the road. So, set the bar high and be a good role model. But the other thing there is that if you've been doing things that you shouldn't be doing, and now you're putting that and you're starting to think, oh boy, I better straighten this out because I do want to be a good role model for my young person. You can't expect them to notice you changed unless you say something. And so when I talk to parents, I say that too. I mean, tell them, geez, up until now, I have been using my cell phone sometimes when I'm driving. And I need to be a good role model for you because you're the most important thing in my life. So beginning today, I will not do that again.
Yeah, honesty is so important. They're no fool. So if they know that you're normally speeding and you're rolling stop signs, you again you have to address it. Hit it straight on and say, "Look, this is helping me as well because I'm going to do my best to follow the rules." So the graduated licensing system and all that type of thing is going to do um, much for traffic safety, and the more layers of testing and the more layers of education that we put in throughout time, right? I mean, again, they get their G1 when they're 16. We don't want them to think about driving again until they're 80. Like, we want to put in different layers in there. So, if I had my way, everybody would go back for testing every 10 years. Wouldn't that do amazing things for traffic safety? Because people will have to keep it top of mind. Right now, it gets buried under everything else that goes on in our day-to-day life. But to keep everything top of mind is really what my goal's been, and to try and get the discussion going. So that's why I was very happy to participate in the podcast today.
And thank you for saying that because that's so important. Get the discussion going. I mean, my daughter never leaves this house that I don't say, drive safely. If you need a ride home, call me. Don't be afraid to leave the car behind if, you need a ride or what. Always, always, always. But it has to be a conversation we're having all the time. When was the last time you changed the oil? Because they it, like most of us, I mean, we don't think of it. You get in the car at one end, you get out at the other end, and you never really think about it's the most dangerous thing we do every day for most people. And the other thing is, so first of all, instructors should never be using a cell phone, nor should parents. And an instructor should never ask a student to do anything that's unsafe or illegal. I was talking to somebody about this the other day that Carrie Schmidt, Sergeant Carrie Schmidt with the OPP, had a video of an instructor who was late taking the student to their road test and had them cut across a green space on the 40, was it the 40, for the one going to Brampton.
It was major, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, "Oh my god," and, it never ever should an instructor ask you to do anything that's illegal, and I will say that that rarely, rarely happens, but it's something that people should be aware of. An instructor should never do anything that makes the student uncomfortable. Now, I'm not talking about asking them to make a left turn when the instructor feels they're, ready for it and the instructor is coaching. I'm talking more about, you know, putting a hand on a knee or making comments that are uncomfortable. And for two reasons. One is that, there is an appropriateness to a relationship. But the other side is that if the student is anxious with a particular instructor, then change the instructor. And all you have to do is go back to the school and say, I'm a little uncomfortable. Can I please have a different instructor? And that's okay.
Which is another good reason to choose a large school, right? I mean,
Yes.
because not all personalities mesh, and I'm not embarrassed at all to say that when I was pregnant, I had a few students who said, "I don't want to drive with her anymore." Now, whether that was my temper or whether that was just because they were nervous, I don't know. But I'm humble enough to know that I'm not, everybody's cup of tea, and people may not feel comfortable with me either. So it's not always a male female relationship. It could just be, the situation where our personalities don't mesh. And for that reason, I agree with you, Emery, 100%. Ask to switch instructors because no learning is taking place at that point. There has to be a mutual respect, right, between the and any teacher can tell you that there has to be that level of professionalism and respect in between. So if you have a large school, then you have lots of different options. But if you're picking somebody off Craigslist or Marketplace or Kijiji or something, this is just an independent person who's throwing a roof sign on a car and he's trying to make a fast buck. Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. They're not all the same, but generally speaking, that's why they're there, right? I mean, otherwise they would be joining a reputable company, um, rather than just being kind of an independent, let's call them.
I completely agree with that. Another one that I had a student say to me a couple of years back when she was about 17 taking driving lessons, she said, well, I always ask all the students that work for me, what was your experience? Did you take driver education? She says, well, yeah, but the guy who was my driving instructor used to fall asleep all the time. And I was quite appalled. And I said, well, fall asleep in the car. And she said, well, yeah. And she said, but I figured that I was just such a good driver that he was that comfortable that he could fall asleep. And I said, but what did your parents say? And she said, well, I didn't tell them. They paid a lot of money for driving instructing, and I didn't want to upset them. And it's yeah, but you're paying for a product that you're not getting. And by falling asleep in the car, I mean, this guy is putting her life at risk. And that's totally unacceptable. So it's teaching young people that they need to speak up. If the instructor makes you feel uncomfortable, even if it's just kind of an icky feeling, switch instructors.
And I agree with that. I mean, we definitely are trying to get them to be autonomous and to be, to stand up for themselves and to be educated and to know what their rights are. And that's one of the things I really preach in my class. And I've taken some complaints about it too, saying, listen, if a police officer gives you a ticket, these are the steps you need to follow through. We're not trying to teach them to cut corners, but yet to be educated and understand what their rights are and what their responsibilities are.
Yeah, and a lot of responsibilities come with driving. To yourself, you're responsible now for the first time probably in your whole life, totally for your own life, and for the responsibility for lives of everybody in your vehicle and the people in other cars and pedestrians and cyclists on the road. I mean, it's a huge responsibility, and we need to take it very seriously.
And what I always used to tell them is nobody's watching. I mean, as much as there's police officers who are on the roads, by far and large, it's really about being making a decision on your own that this is why I'm going to follow these rules and regulations because I believe in them. And so that's the difference between maybe a driving school who is just simply telling them what the rules are and then somebody who is saying these are the rules and regulations, and at the end of the day, nobody's going to be in the parking lot making sure you put on your seatbelt, right? That's going to be up between, right? And so we need to get them to understand it like from a deep core level to say, I get it. I get it and I'm going to follow it. So that's so important.
Yeah, it comes down to integrity, right? Driving integrity.
And how do you do that? How do you do that by e-learning? Like it's hard. It's hard as much as technology is helping us now during the pandemic. I'm afraid that we're going to be losing that, that core ability to kind of get down to the serious matters, in person, where I can pull it from them and kind of get them to feel it.
Well, I totally agree with you on that. And part of that is that in a classroom, when you're looking at a bunch of students and some of them are getting a little glassy-eyed, you can switch it up. You can, add some energy to the room. If they're in front of a screen, they're gone. So I really believe in in-person instruction. I'm a really firm believer, and maybe in the future there'll be a better way. But I mean, you can look at it with students now in school. It's they zone out after a while. We all do. I mean, there are all kinds of studies about that. You can only, I mean, even people listening to the podcast kind of zone out periodically, and it's true. I mean, that's the way it is, and you may have to listen a couple of times. But when you're in a classroom, it's quite different. And I think it's a really valuable investment and a worthwhile experience. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about with instructors is no instructor should ever ask a student to sign for lessons that they haven't taken. And that's a big one. Yeah. And I remember talking to a student who had been asked to sign for some, and they were in such a hurry to get their license. They thought that for signing for them, that was going to push them. You know, the guy told them, well, they were doing so well. They didn't really need to learn this. They didn't really need to learn that. Baloney. In the first year, a student should have, I would say, at least 100 hours of practice, and I think you're a little higher than that, but I would say at least 100. And yeah, and so by actually cutting down the time with the instructor, I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. So again, making sure that you're with a reputable company in the sense that you know we'll make sure that the instructors are accountable as well. So we have different internal checks that we can do, such as watching the kilometers and kind of matching it up with their pay sheets and so on and so forth. Because obviously we want to make sure that everything the instruction is delivered in a timely fashion, but also that it's legitimate. So if you're just working with some independent that's on Kijiji or whatnot, then it's a little bit difficult that way.
Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to go through is you had some great tips for how to get your money's worth from a driving school.
I built my brand on two words: experience and exposure. So I want to try and make sure that we give each of our students as much experience as possible. But unfortunately, sometimes we're struggling a bit when mom and dad will say, "I signed you up for driver training, they're going to teach you." Well, we can't do everything on our own either. We only have 10 hours to get this done. So like I can keep adding more things to the program so long as the basics are covered. But look, honestly, if I have to spend 2 hours saying that one's the gas, that one's the brake, that's too hard, that's too light, like if the vehicle motor control of it, if we can have that mastered, I can mess with their brains, right? Like I can bring them to different cities, I can take them on the highway, we can add on so many different layers of of the training, but I can't do that if I have to spend 3 to 4 to 5 hours kind of teaching vehicle control. So driving is not always just about making it smooth, it's about being smart. So how can parents help get more value for their dollar is we need to work together as a partnership. And so for every 1 hour that we teach, then we're looking for 2 to 3 hours of practice in between. Just like somebody who's taking piano lessons, the piano lessons is only a half an hour, and they're having to go home and practice a half an hour to an hour every day before they go back to their next appointment.
Right. But one of the other things that you said was to start the instruction early so that you can teach instead of correct. So there's got to be like a fine balance there.
Exactly, and you want to spread it out over time, right? So if the student is, let's say, just got their G1 in January of this year, hey, look at it outside. It's a perfect time. Let's go. Let's get her started. We want to try and spread it out as long as we can so that they get the more experience and exposure. And honestly, if the student is working the driving school is working with the parents, then if we can get the student to a level where they're not scaring scaring mom and dad so much, mom and dad will practice more often with
That's
them.
another good reason to involve a driving school because it is scary. I mean, some students really overestimate their abilities or are kind of clueless about what's happening on the road around them. And it can be scary. So, another reason to let a professional teach the skills, handle that level of anxiety, and then you're just coaching, and reinforcing. I had one student, for example, say, "Oh, my dad really wants me to get my license," which really is the totally wrong attitude to begin with. The dad, I mean, everybody gets to that point where they kind of are looking forward to handing over the keys so they can hang up the taxi with key, right? Where you've been shuffling them everywhere for 16 years, 17 years. And it would be nice to have them pick up the milk or the bread or gas up the vehicle for you, all of that. I mean, everybody kind of looks forward to that. But rushing them is really the wrong way to go. And this young man says he wants to book all his lessons in a week. Well, in a week, you're going to learn nothing. It's you're going to come into that week and go out of that week with exactly the skills you came into the course with.
Well, I don't know about that, but is it ideal? Absolutely not. But it's better than not
True.
coming at all.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. So I would take them, and I would do the best that I could. I would try to convince them to spread it out. But also, speaking on that point, when we're talking about right now, the thing I'm seeing the most is high anxiety students. So let's talk about that for a second, because as a parent, what I would recommend is that you could do it stepwise and say, okay, Jillian or whatnot, I know that you're nervous about this. I'll tell you what, let's just start with step one, and that's doing your written test. And I promise, once you do your written test, I'm not going to force you to drive right now. And then, a few months down the road, you can talk about, okay, honey, let's just do some basic stuff. Let's just go sit in the car. I'm going to show you where all the controls are. We're not even going to move. And then the next, and so we're going to try and build this up, so that's the first, the one side of the spectrum. And then the other side of the spectrum, as you mentioned, people who are like, yep, I have my G1 already for a year and a half and I'm ready to go, and now I want to rush everything all together. So that's a little bit more problematic for us. So I wish, if I could tell one thing to my parents, is let's start them early. Get their G1 early and get them into the class early and get them into the car early, and we can spread it out rather than waiting to the end. At the end, I'm just correcting. I'm trying to fix all the mistakes that were, and by then it's a habit. So if they're breaking late, how do I break that habit? It's through repetition. Well, you're not giving me enough time. I only have 10 hours to fix that repetition, to kind of correct. So early, that's the key. Come and see us early.
When you're talking about anxiety, I mean, people think, well, my daughter is too anxious. I don't think she should drive. Now, sure, for sure, there are some people who should never drive for whatever reasons, personal reasons, I don't know. But for most people, if you don't learn to drive, then you are trusting somebody else. If you put the time in and get over the anxiety because you build the skills that help you maintain control and realize, so you get to the point where you can see what's happening ahead on the road, you can predict with some level of certainty what's going to happen, you can avoid if you need to, then you have control. But if you are anxious and because of that, you turn the control over to somebody else, well, that's when I start to get anxious. When somebody with lower level skills who has much less dedication to the learning and to the operation of a vehicle, that's when I get nervous. So, um, if get by your anxiety, but you got to find the right instructor, you've got to find the right school, you've got to put the time in to really learn. But once you learn, it's the vehicle protects you, the road system protects you, your um, habits and training protect you.
And confidence does not come easy for a lot of people, especially with people who have high anxiety. So I totally get that. And so we have to get, they have to cut themselves a break for a little bit and just know that, everybody who starts out driving a car are a little bit nervous. Maybe, maybe not to the degree you are. So let's work on that. Let's work on some confidence. Let's work on some skills in order to let me show you how to protect yourself. It's the same as a self-defense class or whatnot, but that's kind of what defensive driving is. It's a self-defense class. How do I make sure that I'm protected and that nobody can come and get me, type of thing. And so once we can empower them on how to protect themselves, then I think the confidence level, grows. So don't be afraid. I know a lot of people, yeah, everybody starts out where they're not comfortable and they're not confident. But I think as a parent, that's a part of our job, is to push them out of their comfort zone at least a little bit, and to kind of push them to trust themselves, trust their instincts.